Hello, hello, hello. This is Dragica again. And today I have a very special guest with me, Dr. Rebecca Southerns. Rebecca is the founder and CEO of Sage Solutions, I should say, which is an independent consulting firm that helps clients to achieve strategic clarity. An important point here that I think we're going to touch on more than once during our conversation. So Rebecca is a strategic analyst and a professional facilitator. With her talent, she has conducted numerous community consultations, strategy planning sessions, and provided research for a range of Canadian and international clients. She is a gifted communicator, as I got to experience during our conversations, and I think you're going to hear her be very clear on how she's going to talk with us today. What I appreciate about Rebecca most is her ability to synthesize complex thoughts and ideas and really bring it together coherently. And during her career of more than 20 years in public, private, and voluntary sectors, she's facilitated strategic planning, analysis of social and health policies, and she provides strategic coaching to leaders. What really caught my attention about Rebecca is her ability to connect the dots. And that, in fact, I think is what gains her the trust of colleagues and clients alike. That's a snapshot of her career. Now, academically, she's no slouch either. Rebecca holds a PhD in rural studies with a focus on sustainable models for rural women's healthcare. And she has a master's degree in public administration with an emphasis on public and voluntary sector governance and policy analysis. I think in all, a really well-rounded set of credentials. And Rebecca, welcome. I couldn't be happier to have you on the podcast today and share your thoughts and thinking with our listening audience. Welcome.
Thanks very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
So, one of the things that I get on about soapbox once in a while is organizational effectiveness. My thoughts very much are that effectiveness eats efficiency for brunch, just like strategy and execution. One of the factors that I think is really important to be effective is adaptability. And that is one of your areas of expertise. And so I'd like to talk about adaptability today as our conversation theme. Now, I also get quite a bit of pushback when I talk about adaptability and how important it is. And the pushback I get are from the folks who are still on the continuous improvement bandwagon. So here's what I'd like to ask you, Rebecca. How would you guide business leaders to think about adaptability as a competitive advantage? Tell us what you think about that.
I would say that everyone has to adapt and everyone does adapt. So it's not a question of should we or shouldn't we, so much as it is to what degree and can we find ways to adapt that are enjoyable for us, that are easy for us, that are that allow us to do it easily and enjoy in a way that suits us in that sense. And I mean that individually and corporately. And so I don't think the question really is should we adapt, but really how will we adapt? How much, how fast, and in what ways? And so when I think about continuous improvement, for example, I would put that at perhaps one end of a continuum of maybe small tweaks, little changes to, I picture it being like the old-fashioned radio dial, something's a little bit out of focus or a little fuzzy sounding, and you just twist the dial and make it a little bit better. Whereas, at the other end of that continuum, you might have wholesale transformation from one thing into a whole different thing. And I think most organizations find themselves somewhere in between. I noticed in Michael Bungay-Stainer's new book, How to Begin, he talks about the difference between U+ instead of U 2.0. It's like a slight improvement instead of a whole new me, and I think adaptability can find its way into any places in that continuum. But I think for me, the interesting thing about it really is finding people's energy and organizational energy for it, so that we can be energized in doing it, and we can find ways to do it that keep us both relevant and energized. We're coming through a patch of time where people have been completely exhausted. We know that the rates of burnout are alarmingly high and well-being is low. And so in that context, the more we can invite organizations to do their inevitable adapting in ways that recharge their batteries rather than depleting people, I think we'll find that is a more productive course. And so, continuous improvement might be a little more perhaps conservative to what the times warrant in lots of contexts. But I think for anyone adapting, it's about finding your preferred ways of doing something you're going to have to do anyway.
Great. And it's going to be obvious once you do start to adapt that you are also adapting to a whole new competitive landscape, and have the behaviors and so change to reflect that. So what I picked up on that you said about transformations. So, when the pandemic started 2.5 years ago now, more than 2.5 years ago, one of the early initiatives that a lot of organizations had was how to go digital, and go digital very, very quickly. And so they were, deemed to be transformational initiatives, and how to allow people to work remotely and so on. But what I observed during the last 2.5 years, let's say, is that a lot more of the adapting was focused on two things. It was focused on processes in organizations, how work is going to be done differently, and on technology. And it seems to me that the very first focus should have been on people and the mindset and, the different behaviors. And, to get all of that happening, there had to be some sort of strategic plan. So what would you say around how adaptability fits into that whole mess that so many organizations have experienced and still haven't achieved transformation 2.5 years later? What do you think about that?
There's lots there. I think one of the things that I use, one of the tools that I find most helpful in this adaptability space is something called the Adaptability Quotient. And it's a company called AQAI that I coach with, and they have a fairly new, well-tested, robust tool for measuring adaptability. So it's from that tool and the research that has gone behind it that I'm drawing some of these observations. But when you talk about the importance of behaviors in adaptability, certainly we know that there are certain skill sets, if I can call it that, behavioral, individual level activities that contribute to our adaptability. So for example, grit, we've heard of through the work of Angela Duckworth, or resilience, or mental flexibility. Those kinds of things are skill sets that people can learn and are reflected in our individual behaviors. And so that would be one area where I would encourage leaders that I'm coaching really to lean in and say, where is your grit, for example, which is kind of your stick-to-itiveness? Where is that helping you to be focused on a mission, for example? And where might it be reaching past the ideal place and kind of going into the territory of diminishing returns, where we stick with something too long for it to be useful, and we kind of dig our heels into nostalgia or old ways of doing things, or maybe just sheer stubbornness that keeps us at something for too long when in fact we should be changing. So that's when another element of adaptability, say mental flexibility or even unlearning, those two elements need to complement our grittiness to say, actually, I am going to let go of ways of thinking and ways of behaving that are no longer serving me well. I'm going to realize that there are multiple ways to achieve that mission, for example, and therefore be willing to switch course. So I think there are times when our various behaviors can work at cross purposes to each other, and we need to make sure that they are well aligned. What I would want to say alongside that is that adaptability is not only an individual activity, it's also a collective one. And I find that really encouraging, because if we are tired out at an individual level, we can draw on resources from the corporate level or our team to help us be more adaptable. And similarly, our individual adaptability superpowers can really bolster the overall adaptability of our team. And so, for example, the emotional health of your corporation, the level of supportiveness of your company or of your team can directly add to the adaptability of the individuals within it. And that's why culture is as important to adaptability as those individual skills are. Interestingly, one more thing there though, the most important, most powerful determinant that we have in that tool on adaptability measurement is hope. And that is a mindset, yes. It is a skill set, yes. It is more than that. It's kind of a combination of three things. It's the belief in a positive future, but it's also an ability to see multiple pathways to get there, and confidence that you have the motivation and the agency to move along those pathways. And so as leaders in corporate environments, I believe that we have a huge opportunity to instill hope in and with our colleagues in those ways of casting that positive vision for a future that they want to get behind, helping them see that there are multiple ways to get there, not just one way, and helping them stay energized and motivated to do that. And I think by finding your preferred pathways to adaptability collectively and individually, you contribute to that motivational piece.
That is very powerful. I see what you mean, that was a lot to unpack. One of the things that came to mind, Rebecca, is, and this is, I do a fair bit of work and training and development, is in critical thinking. And what I found in the last at least 2-3 years, if not longer, is that it's lacking. Have you found that there isn't a whole ton of critical thinking happening?
I'd be interested in hearing more about the examples that you've noticed of that. It feels like a really large category to be able to comment on broadly, but I would say that two things I know contribute to adaptability in that realm. One is an ability for leaders to see the big picture. And when I think about strategic thinking, if not critical thinking, there is an element of connecting that big picture to the day-to-day. And I think the people that are the most strategic leaders that I know are the people that can fill in that middle, where they aren't lost in the weeds, but they're not so high in the clouds that you don't have any idea how that connects with real life. And so if we can help people understand that big picture thinking helps us be more adaptable, because we don't get stuck in the minutia of you have to follow it this way and have to do step 1 and then step 2 and then step 3. We know that we can do things different ways, but we have this very firm anchor on the big picture reason for doing things. I think that can really help people. And I think the other thing is this idea of working out loud. And I say that because as people work in more remote teams and more dispersed work environments, the requirement to communicate effectively becomes even higher. And we know that inside adaptability measurement, the quality of extroversion is really important. And that doesn't mean that every person has to be a raving extrovert all of the time. What it means is when you are leading a change with a team, you work out loud, you talk people through things, you stay open to sharing information out loud. You don't hoard that information. You don't assume people know things that they haven't been told. And so if we can really lean into that, the idea of working out loud, it helps us to share the information people need in order to do the critical thinking and problem solving that you're talking about. Because certainly I would be absolutely in agreement that critical thinking along with adaptability are mentioned without fail across every measure of employability skills of the future that I've seen recently. I'm working on a new book on elastic leadership and the idea of being adaptable in ways that stretch us, but not too much, like a rubber band where you don't want to have it be not stretched at all. It's useless, but stretched too far and it will either snap or it will fail to go back to its original useful shape. And so as we think about that metaphor, we want people to be able to think critically without perhaps giving way to too much, for example, negativity. There's this kind of image of stretching but not too far. And so I would put both that critical thinking space and the adaptability skill set into a broader bucket of employees and leaders of the future need to figure out both.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And to answer your question at the beginning, where I've noticed the critical thinking being lacking has certainly been in problem solving, and but also in areas where there should be more strength in managing risk, and there is just not a lot of time dedicated to just thinking through things. Everybody's in a rush. Everything's got to get done yesterday. And it just, the environment, as you pointed out, so many people burnt out. The environment isn't lending itself all that well to spend time and thought and leaning back and looking through the window and and thinking.
You're making me think, if I can just follow up on that, the Dory Clark's recent book called The Long Game, I found really useful in that area.
Actually, I have that book, yeah.
She talks about creating white space and making sure that in order to be strategic, leaders need to make sure that kind of reflective space is built in to our lives. And certainly you're catching me during the summer where I live, and it feels like really easy for me to talk about those kinds of buffers right now, but come October, November, and right in the middle of busy season, it'll feel a little different to talk about this. But I think having people prioritize mind space in which to think and reflect, particularly at a leadership level, is really important, because we need to have sometimes I call it the reconnaissance capacity, an ability to kind of look up and around and suss out what's actually going on. And I think if we're just moving from crisis to crisis, we don't have a good opportunity to do that.
Yeah. If and this is maybe a question out of maybe left field a little bit, but do you think that there's a particular kind of person, certain traits or characteristics that a person would have that allows themselves to take a lot more of that white space compared to those people who are just go all the time?
I would say that our personalities are changeable. Lots of things that we used to think were fixed are actually learnable. And so there's probably many of us, myself included, that are not very prone to leaving a lot of buffer, but can learn to do that. And so I just think I'm trying to lean into the idea that most things are learnable. And so if we think about the way we manage our calendar, or the kind of people we surround ourselves with, or what we read, or how we divvy up our time, any of those things are learnable skills. And so I think there's lots of ways to learn things, but I think it's starting with the belief that things are learnable and that they are not fixed character elements as much as they are skills and habits. I think when we can remember that, then it means that we can get better at them.
Okay, so that kind of leads me into thinking about diversity in the workplace, right? Diversity, equity, inclusion is a big topic for many corporations these days. Some would say it's a lot of lip service. Others would vehemently defend that they're on track and to have a very diverse workforce and contractors even, so it doesn't just go for the employees. But just based on everything that we've been talking about, how would you rate, let's use that word, rate, diversity in terms of importance to organizations to be able to be more adaptable, to shift their mindsets, to shift behaviors? Where do you, how would you rate that in terms of importance?
We know from a solid body of evidence, probably best popularized by work done through Project Aristotle at Google initially, but other places as well, that more diverse teams perform better. So you mentioned earlier being interested in organizational effectiveness. I think one of the starting points for improving effectiveness is for our teams and our workforces to be more diverse. And I say that across multiple axes of diversity. So whether we're talking about anti-Black racism, whether we are talking about cognitive diversity, gender diversity, age diversity. I'm very interested in some of the work being done by Chip Conley and others on multi-generational work teams. I think there's lots of ways to be diverse, and I would be a huge proponent of building diversity in our teams across multiple areas of that. The link for me, or one link with adaptability, would come from the fact, as I mentioned, that our work teams and our corporate environments more broadly affect and are affected by our individual adaptability. And so if I am in a work environment where the status quo is rewarded, where innovation is squelched, where there is only one right way to do something, the likelihood of me being highly adaptable is much lower than if I'm in a place where disruption is welcomed, where failure is expected and celebrated and learned from, where lots of innovation opportunities are created all the time. So if that is the frame, then I would say that multiple perspectives inside that are protective. I'm somebody who does stakeholder engagement, and I would always rather hear from more people than fewer because it helps us with our blind spots. And so to the extent that adaptability is strengthened by, I mentioned earlier, mental flexibility, that is seeing lots of different possible ways to do something. My feeling is the more diverse the voices around the table are, the more likely we are to hear multiple ways of doing things. And therefore that makes us collectively and potentially individually more adaptable, because we become open to the, not just the possibility, but the reality that there are multiple ways of getting something done. I think another link for me is in the area of unlearning. Unlearning is where we take behaviors that used to serve us well, or we thought they did, and willingly release them because they are no longer serving us well. And I think diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice work, reconciliation, those would be areas where we as a culture and as individuals have to embrace unlearning in order to release oppressive, colonial-driven ways of doing things and embrace a more anti-oppressive route. So to the extent that we do that in the service of diversity, equity, inclusion, it will also make us more adaptable. So I'm certainly not trying to conflate the two. They are separate. They are very important for different reasons, both of them, but I can certainly see how they could be mutually reinforcing without too much of a stretch.
Okay. Wow. Actually, we could probably go on all day long about everything that we've touched on, because it's so salient to today's workplace environments, even for entrepreneurs who are dealing with clients and so on. So a lot there for listeners to be able to unpack and take on. So any last comments you want to make about what we've been talking about, or something different?
Mm-hmm. I think what I would end with is to say that when I first thought about the need to adapt. It was early days of the pandemic, and I read a quote by Dan Gilbert that said, "The slowest pace of change you are ever going to experience in your lifetime is happening right now." And I have to admit, in that moment, my shoulders probably slumped, and I don't know if I sighed out loud or not, but I thought, oh my goodness, I don't know if I have it in me to adapt any faster. You know, we can feel like we're on that hamster wheel of trying to keep up. And clearly, you mentioned technology. Clearly, technology and other things are changing faster than most humans can keep up with. So to me, the good news about adaptability research and measurement that's happening right now is that it is learnable, is that it can energize us. And so even though we have to do it, we can find pathways to do it that are well suited to our preferences. And we aren't stuck in having to do it in ways that don't fit us, or we don't have to say, oh, I'm just not adaptable. You know, we can embrace that growth mindset and really learn how to do it well. And so because there are multiple elements that contribute to adaptability, it's not a question of, oh my goodness, I have to get good at all of them. It's much more about saying, there's lots of different pathways to being adaptable. Which pathway fits me the best? And how can I get really good at the ways of adapting that suit me? And to me, that is a really good news message. So I would just encourage your listeners not to feel that adaptability is one more should on their to-do list, or is one more exhausting requirement. It's actually the opposite. It can recharge your batteries in a sustainable way rather than depleting them. And I think that's a really hopeful and evidence-based message today.
And that's really such a positive message to end on. That's really great. So Rebecca, if somebody wanted to know more about what you do, how would they get a hold of you? What's the best way to get a hold of you?
Thanks for asking. The easiest way is just through my name. So my name is Rebecca Southerns. It's Sutherns. And if you look at RebeccaSoutherns.com, you'll find me there, and similarly on LinkedIn. I write a blog. It's on hiatus for the summer, but we'll start again in September. It's called Wiser Decisions Faster. And it comes out weekly and talks about ways of building our collaborative adaptability. So I would welcome getting in touch with anybody that way. The other way would be to go on to your local or online booksellers, and you can find my writing there. I have a book called Nimble that was written in 2019 that's about nimble facilitation, and another called Sightline that came out last year. Sorry about that, I'm losing my technology here. Sightline came out in 2020 rather, and it's about adaptable strategy making. And my new book will be out later this year called Elastic. I mentioned it, and there'll be some leadership workshops available for that. And so if anyone's interested in building their adaptability, there's certainly adaptability assessments and coaching and leadership workshops available.
Fabulous. Well, Rebecca, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been absolutely wonderful. And we'll release the podcast to listeners as well as on the YouTube channel. So you'll be visible in one and you can be heard in the other. And hopefully we'll be able to have you back for another edition at another time. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.